Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. It started like any other Tuesday all hands. Half-hearted greetings, stale muffins on the back table, and a projector that refused to sync until exactly 2 minutes after the meeting was supposed to start. I sat near the middle, notebook open, pen in hand, trying not to look as exhausted as I felt. We just pulled off a content campaign launch with a 2-day turnaround because someone forgot to loop in creative. Again. My team was running on fumes, and I knew they were looking to me for steadiness. Enter Dylan Mercer. Our shiny new CEO, barely into his 30s, strolled up to the mic like he was about to unveil a tech product, not a company strategy. His voice was slick, his smile effortless. And standing just behind him, arms crossed like a bouncer, was Ben, the new SEO specialist who'd been with us exactly 1 month and already managed to insult half the content department. Ben had this way of looking at people like they were data points in a spreadsheet he was trying to optimize out of existence. During his onboarding, he told our junior writer her work lacked measurable impact and once referred to our content management system as the relic we refuse to bury. Class act. So when Dylan started talking about streamlining and modernizing vision, I sat up straighter. I want to be very clear about where we're headed, Dylan said, pacing slowly. We're entering a phase where lean, agile teams will define our future. We'll be re-evaluating roles across all departments to ensure they align with a culture of performance, disruption, and, let's be honest, fresh thinking. He didn't say it, not outright, but I heard it. Fresh thinking, agile, disruption. All the code words that meant younger, cheaper, more willing to say yes without questioning the strategy. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ben nod, just slightly, like he was co-signing every syllable. I felt a slow heat rising in my chest. My department had been producing the company's best-performing content for 3 years straight. We were the only team that hadn't missed a single deadline last quarter. But we were also, coincidentally, the team with the highest average age. The message was clear. Evolution was coming. And it was starting with people like me. Back in my office, the view of the skyline did nothing to ground me. I stared at the city I'd grown with, built in, worked for, knowing that some exec fresh out of an incubator lab thought I was obsolete. But what Dylan didn't know was that I'd seen this pattern before. I'd lived through 3 acquisitions, 2 rebrands, and 1 internal coup. And every time, I adapted, reinvented, survived. So while he gave that sleek little speech about fresh thinking, he had no idea what I was quietly preparing behind the scenes, what I'd already built. And the funny thing about storms? Sometimes the ones you don't see coming are the ones that take the roof off your house. The day after the meeting, I woke up before my alarm. Not from anxiety, though, to be fair, it pulsed under my skin like a low, persistent current, but from something sharper. Instinct. That sense you get when the ground beneath you is about to shift. I got to the office early. The 19th floor was still quiet, the lights just beginning to hum to life. I always loved those first moments of stillness. The view over the city made everything seem briefly manageable. The servers hadn't started humming yet, the emails hadn't begun to pour in, and for just a few minutes I could breathe. By 9 a.m., the hallway outside my office began to fill. I was mid-sentence in an email when I heard his voice, Ben's, floating from the open lounge. I swear, I need to create a crash course for the old guard, he said, not even trying to lower his voice. If I get 1 more optimization request in a doc file, I might just retire before they do. Laughter followed. Not mine. I kept typing, but I mentally added it to the list. That made at least 10 remarks like that in the last month. Ageist jokes, sarcastic digs, smug references to legacy thinking, always aimed vaguely but consistently at anyone not fresh out of a startup incubator, and, more specifically, at my team. We were the blog people in his eyes, the brand dinosaurs. It didn't matter that our content strategy brought in 60% of the company's qualified leads last quarter. In Ben's world, if it wasn't AI-generated and SEO sculpted, it was obsolete. At lunch, I stepped out with Tina, our project coordinator. She's 36, brilliant, grounded, and one of the few people who understood the value of actually finishing what you start. "Have you noticed?" I asked, once we had coffee in hand. She didn't even pretend not to know what I meant. "You mean Ben?" I nodded. Tina gave a wry smile. "He's not subtle, and Dylan's not pushing back, which says more than any memo." I leaned against the brick wall of the cafe patio. "It's not just him, is it? Something's shifting." Tina hesitated, then said, "He doesn't want evolution. He wants erasure. And people like us, who've been here long enough to remember a different version of this place, we're a reminder of what he wants gone." It hit me harder than I expected, not because I hadn't seen it coming, but because it was becoming undeniable. I didn't say anything else. I just sipped my coffee and stared out at the crosswalk. Because what Dylan didn't know, what Ben couldn't possibly imagine, was that while they were plotting their sleek, shiny rebrand of this company, I'd been building something of my own, and soon they'd have to reckon with it. Friday mornings used to be my favorite. There was always something softer in the air, fewer meetings, slower coffee breaks, laughter over breakfast tacos in the kitchenette. But this one tasted like static. Ben had made another comment in the hallway, something snide about the content museum, and how some departments should just be archived, not staffed. I wasn't even in the room when he said it, but it got back to me within the hour. People were starting to look at me not just with sympathy, but with resignation, like they already assumed nothing would change. And maybe they were right. Robin's so-called follow-up with HR? A polite nothing. I got a short Slack message that said, "Spoke with them. Let's keep an eye on things and regroup in a couple of weeks. Sound good?" No, it didn't sound good. It sounded like dismissal. So I did what I always do when I'm being underestimated. I stopped talking and started building. That night, I stayed late, not because I had to, but because it was the only time I could think clearly. The open floor plan was empty, the noise was gone, and the city lights outside the window reminded me I wasn't alone, just unseen. I pulled up a folder I hadn't opened in months, my side project, the one I'd been tinkering with for almost a year, an internal performance mapping tool that visualized cross-departmental contribution in real time. It tracked which teams were doing the actual work behind launches, where strategy bottlenecked, where execution bloomed. It told the truth without spin. And if deployed correctly, it would make every hidden hour, every behind-the-scenes effort from people like my team, impossible to ignore. The original version had been clunky, but I'd refined it, smoothed out the data integrations, even added anonymized benchmarking for transparency. And now? It was almost ready. I stayed past midnight. By the time I shut down, I had a working prototype, a map of real impact, and more importantly, a plan. Over the next week, I ran a quiet pilot, just within my department. I positioned it as a tool for our own internal clarity, and my team responded instantly. They were hungry for something real, something that recognized their value in a landscape that kept pretending they were invisible. The data was staggering. Content strategy, my so-called blog people, had contributed to over 70% of the company's top-performing campaigns in the last 2 quarters. We weren't just visible, we were foundational. And once I had that proof, I knew exactly what to do next. I requested a one-on-one with Dylan. He didn't respond at first. "Too busy," his assistant said. "Maybe next week." But I was persistent. I framed it as strategy optimization insights. And that got his attention. We met on Wednesday morning. He invited me into his glass-walled office, all curated modernity and minimalist decor. He didn't stand when I walked in, just gestured to the seat across from him with a rehearsed smile. "Christine, thanks for reaching out. What can I help you with?" I didn't waste time. I pulled up the dashboard on my tablet and turned it toward him. "This," I said evenly, "is what's actually happening behind the scenes here, and it's not what your current perception is reflecting." He leaned in, curious. He scrolled, tapping and dragging across the interface. His smile tightened. I watched his eyes flicker with something I hadn't seen before: uncertainty. "This shows contributions across every project launched this fiscal year," I explained. "Where the work is being generated, who's actually doing it, what the impact is per department." "And you built this?" I nodded. In my own time, with clean data, no bias, just facts. He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was finally starting to see what had been standing in front of him this entire time. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. Your culture, I said, is sliding into toxicity, and the people doing the most meaningful work are being devalued by noise, by bias, and by people who think jokes about age are harmless. He blinked, slowly. You're talking about Ben. I'm talking about a system that enables Ben, I replied. But yes, he's a symptom, not the root. There was a long pause. Then he said, Why are you showing me this? And I said, Because I believe in this company, but more importantly, I believe in my people, and I'm not waiting for permission to protect them. He didn't speak for a long moment. Just stared at the data, then back at me. I stood. I'll be running a full pilot of this next month. Whether it becomes company-wide depends on your next move. And I left. In the elevator, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth. And now that it was out there, the truth was going to do what it always does, cut through the noise. I thought nothing could surprise me after years in this industry. I'd seen layoffs disguised as restructuring, promotions that were just golden cages, and entire departments erased with a polite email. But I had never heard anything like what Dylan Mercer said in that room. Everyone over the age of 35, I am waiting for your resignation letters by the end of the day. The words hit the floor like a dropped bomb. I blinked, then again. The air seemed to thin around us. I looked around at the faces beside me, colleagues, mentors, some of the smartest, most dedicated professionals I'd ever worked with. Their expressions mirrored mine, stunned, pale, caught somewhere between disbelief and slow-building fury. And yet, Dylan stood there, arms casually crossed, as if he'd just asked us to update our Slack bios. As if what he was saying wasn't illegal, unethical, and breathtakingly arrogant. A few people laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. It never came. I know it sounds harsh, he continued, but it's necessary. We're transitioning to a younger, more agile workforce. You've done your part. Now it's time to make room for what's next. He might as well have slapped us. I opened my mouth to speak, to challenge him, but HR was already handing out folders, one after another. Voluntary exits, they called them. Pre-signed NDAs, quiet payoffs, smooth transitions. I held mine in my hands like it was radioactive. By noon, I saw the exodus begin. Half the office was emptying out, people I'd worked alongside for years. Liam from DevOps, who once rebuilt the entire client interface over a weekend. Marisol from Legal, who'd negotiated every major partnership since 2015. Even Daniel, our lead designer, who'd won 3 industry awards last year. Gone. Not because they failed, because they turned 36. I locked myself in my office, the blinds still open to the Austin skyline I'd once been so proud to overlook. I stared at the resignation form for 20 minutes. HR had already disabled my email. The system knew. The company knew. It was already done. In the end, I signed it. Not because I accepted it, but because I knew, deep down, this was the final nudge I'd needed. They wanted silence. They wanted submission. But what they had done was declare war on the wrong woman. And while they were celebrating their youthful reinvention, I was already planning their reckoning. They didn't know what was coming next. But they would. Very soon. By Monday, the office didn't feel like itself anymore. It was quieter, colder. Half the desks were empty. The energy that had once buzzed through our floor like electricity had evaporated, leaving behind a sterile silence. A few of the younger hires laughed too loudly at their desks, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't. And everyone knew it. The bomb had already gone off. Dylan's announcement, backed by HR, blanketed with legality, and delivered with a sociopathic level of confidence, had gutted the place. Most of us over 35 had signed and left, not because we wanted to, but because we were cornered. Because the message was clear, you don't belong here anymore. What they didn't realize, what Dylan didn't realize, was who they'd actually pushed out. They hadn't just lost older employees. They'd lost the backbone of the company, The people who built it, who protected it, who kept things running not for applause, but because they knew how fragile real momentum could be. And Ben? Ben, the fresh-faced SEO specialist, the same guy who once asked if we still used fax machines for contracts, walked in that morning with his usual swagger. He leaned against the espresso bar like nothing had happened, joked about how much more oxygen there was in the room now. He didn't even understand what kind of bomb he'd helped set off. Because make no mistake, he'd been part of it. Maybe not the executioner, but definitely the whisper behind the curtain. The tone setter. The one who mocked us just enough to make others question our relevance. The one who fed Dylan the fantasy that a younger, flashier workforce would fix everything. And now? Now, the people they cast aside were regrouping. Quietly. Strategically. Because they hadn't just fired us. They'd activated us. Liam, the DevOps wizard who practically built our infrastructure from scratch, called me that afternoon. "Christine," he said, "we should talk. I have an idea." Marisol from Legal messaged me on Signal. "If you're planning anything, I'm in." Daniel, the designer? Already brainstorming how to dismantle the visual brand they stole from under us. We weren't out for blood, but we weren't going to be erased. And Ben? He kept on smiling, still thinking he'd won. But that smug look wouldn't last, because soon he'd realize something too late. When you kick out the architects, don't be surprised when the foundation starts to crumble. I hadn't heard from Ben since the day most of us were forced out. After that Monday, he all but disappeared from my radar. No updates, no social media bravado, no whisper campaigns, just silence. So when his name popped up in my inbox 2 weeks later, sent to my personal email, no subject line, I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. "We need to talk, privately. It wasn't what I thought. Ben." I didn't reply right away. I forwarded it to Liam and Marisol first, adding only one line. "This isn't a prank. Should I hear him out?" Liam was blunt. "If he knows something useful, use it." Marisol replied a few minutes later. "Meet somewhere neutral, get the facts, then decide." So I did. We met in the back booth of an old, nearly empty cafe on the east side. Ben walked in looking completely different. The smugness was gone. So was the perfect grooming and casual arrogance. His eyes were sunken, his clothes wrinkled like he hadn't been sleeping much. He sat down without greeting me, just exhaled sharply and said, "I didn't know they were going to do that." I said nothing. "I made jokes," he continued, voice low. "I bought into the disruption rhetoric. I thought they wanted to clean house, make things leaner, faster. I thought—" He paused, swallowed hard. "I didn't think they'd gut the company." I crossed my arms. "You mocked half of us for being old, outdated, slow." "I know." He looked genuinely ashamed. "And I was wrong. You were the only ones who actually knew how anything worked. Since you left, everything's falling apart. Campaigns failing, clients complaining, the metrics are tanking. They're blaming marketing, but the truth is, they removed the soul of the place and expected it to run on vibes." I narrowed my eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to fix it." I let that hang in the air. He leaned in. "I know the internal systems. I know who's still there and what's broken. I can help, but I can't do it alone. And I owe you more than an apology." I didn't trust him. Not fully. But I believed one thing. He was scared. "What are you proposing?" I asked. Ben slid a USB across the table. "It's everything. Data logs, performance metrics, meeting recordings, including one where Dylan admits off-camera that the age purge was pre-planned and legally gray. This," he tapped the drive, "could ruin him." I stared at it, then at him. "You want to take him down?" He nodded once. "And I want to do it with the people who should have been running the place all along." Later that night, I sat with Liam, Marisol, Daniel, and a few others in a rented workspace. The USB plugged into the monitor in front of us. When we heard Dylan's voice say, "We'll clear out the legacy people. Over 35, overpaid, over it. One clean sweep, and we're agile." There was a long silence. Then Liam spoke first. "We're in." Marisol, "Time to remind them who built this place." I looked around at the faces of people once dismissed, now laser-focused. We didn't have titles anymore. But we had something stronger: purpose, unity, and now, a plan. We didn't go in loud. We went in quietly, deliberately, like surgeons prepping for a very precise operation. One misstep, and the entire thing could backfire. Dylan still held the title. The board still hadn't seen the cracks beneath the polished surface. But we had the matches, and the fuse had already been lit. It started with a leaked performance report. We posted it anonymously to an internal whistleblower forum frequented by former and current employees. The numbers were undeniable. Metrics down 42% since the purge, project timelines doubled, client churn ticking up weekly. We let the data speak, and people started to whisper. Then came the press leak. A niche tech news outlet ran a piece titled, "What Happens When You Erase Experience: The Inside Collapse of a Once Stable Giant." It was well-sourced, thoroughly anonymized. But if you read between the lines, you knew exactly which company it was about. And while all of this was unfolding, Ben, our accidental ally, started feeding us more from the inside. But let me be clear, that didn't mean we liked him. Ben was still, at his core, the same person who called our systems geriatric, who joked that print is for people who still think radio's coming back. He'd insulted us all, some to our faces, most behind our backs. And even now, when he claimed to be with us, he had a way of speaking that made your skin crawl, like he couldn't help reminding you how smart he was. He wasn't humble. He was cornered. Every time he opened his mouth, someone in our group would roll their eyes. Liam once whispered, "If he says growth hack one more time, I'm faking a power outage." Even in the strategy meetings, he acted like he was doing us a favor. But we used him anyway, because he knew where the rot was. He knew who Dylan trusted, who was covering for him, who could be flipped, and who was too far gone. And the irony? Ben had become a pariah inside the company too. Most of the younger staff had started avoiding him, because once the seasoned people were gone, Ben had no buffer, no fallback. His strategies weren't holding up. His ideas didn't scale. And when he couldn't blame us anymore, he had to look in the mirror, which he hated. Still, he gave us what we needed. Employee satisfaction scores, down 61%. Brand engagement, dropping weekly. And the new hires Dylan brought in to replace the legacy staff, leaving faster than they could onboard them. Ben didn't say it out loud, but I could see it in his eyes. Regret. Not redemption, he wasn't wired for that, but a grudging realization that maybe he wasn't as essential as he'd always believed. And me? I didn't want his apology. I didn't want his respect. I wanted the truth to win. Every night, we met in the co-working space, our little task force, the ones they discarded, the ones they tried to forget. Marisol drafted a board complaint, backed by legal precedent and metrics. Daniel was designing a full campaign, one that would blow up in Dylan's face if he tried to spin his way out of it. Liam had quietly reached out to legacy clients who were now reconsidering their contracts. And me? I was writing the narrative. Not fiction, not slander, the truth. About what happens when arrogance replaces wisdom, when buzzwords replace people, when companies decide that experience is expendable, and when they think no one will fight back. They were wrong. By the second week of our plan, the cracks weren't just visible, they were splitting the foundation. We didn't even have to touch the systems. We just let them run, without us, and that was enough. The first signs came quietly. A few employees messaged our private signal group, nervous whispers from inside the building. One said their onboarding portal crashed mid-demo. Another reported their team's shared drive vanished overnight. At first, it claimed routine maintenance. Then it started snowballing. By Thursday, the internal analytics dashboard, one Ben had loudly proclaimed he'd revamped from scratch, just stopped loading. The next day, a client's entire archive of campaign data disappeared from the server. And on Monday, the servers that powered the entire content archive didn't even turn on. Literally, just didn't boot. They tried to pin it on a hardware glitch, but those were the servers I used to monitor. Servers Liam had built redundancies for, systems we'd carefully maintained, patched, backed up. And once they pushed us out, no one knew how any of it actually worked. I sat in our makeshift HQ that morning, an old conference room turned war room, watching Slack screenshots roll in. Panic. People couldn't access basic files. Scheduled launches failed. Emails from clients poured in. Where's our campaign? Why is the link broken? We're reevaluating our contract. Liam leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. It's like watching someone drive a sports car off a cliff and blame the tires. Marisol was already compiling the system logs, proof that the servers were running perfectly until the exact week we were forced out. Daniel was quiet, sketching something on his tablet. I leaned over to see. It was a poster mock-up. You fired the lifeline. Now you're flatlining. Ben showed up late to the meeting, pale and sweaty. They're in full meltdown mode, he said, breathless. Dylan's blaming the junior engineers, the interns, anyone left. HR is scrambling to draft talking points, but the board, they're not buying it anymore. I could tell he wasn't here to posture today. They're calling an emergency review session, he said. Tomorrow morning. I nodded. Then we finish this. The chaos Dylan unleashed, the purge, the arrogance, the worship of buzzwords over backbone, was finally eating itself alive. Everything we'd built, protected, fixed. It had only survived because we were there, behind the curtain, holding the strings together. Now? The curtain had dropped, and the audience was watching. The email landed at 8:03 a.m. sharp. Subject line: Reinstatement opportunity. Immediate response requested. One by one, our phones buzzed. Liam's, Marisol's, Daniel's, mine, Christine. In light of recent performance disruptions and infrastructure challenges, Stratonix leadership would like to formally invite you to resume your previous role. Compensation will be revised to reflect our renewed appreciation of your contribution. We hope to re-establish our working relationship immediately. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. The house was burning down, and now they wanted the firefighters back. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of me felt vindicated. Hell, most of me did. But another part of me felt something else entirely. Resolve. They thought we'd come crawling back one by one. They thought offering us a few inflated salaries would fix what they broke. But we weren't coming back quietly, and we weren't coming back with him. I messaged the others. They want us back, all of us. Liam replied first. Perfect. Let's make our terms. We met that night. Everyone who'd been purged, overlooked, pushed out, insulted. We sat in a circle around a long table in the co-working space we now treated as home base, and we drafted our letter, not individually, together. It read, To the Board of Stratonix, we acknowledge your request for our return and the company's need to stabilize its operations. We are prepared to resume our roles, restore performance levels, and rebuild the systems your current leadership failed to understand. However, our return is conditional. We request the immediate termination of Benjamin Carter, SEO Director, whose divisive behavior, age-discriminatory remarks, and undermining of internal teams directly contributed to the collapse of morale and functionality. We are not simply returning to fix what was broken. We are returning to rebuild something better, without the arrogance that broke it in the first place. Sincerely, the ones you underestimated. We signed it. Every single one of us. Liam, Marisol, Daniel, me, 17 others. I sent it directly to the board's private address with a simple subject line: Our conditions, our standards, your choice. And then I closed my laptop. The next morning, the company announced Benjamin Carter had resigned for personal reasons. Within a week, nearly all of us were reinstated, with new titles, new contracts, and a clause stating we would report directly to a newly appointed committee, not Dylan. They didn't admit it publicly, but behind every PR statement was one undeniable truth. We were the ones who built the company, and now we were the ones rebuilding it, on our terms. Ben? He never saw it coming. And Dylan? Let's just say his next board review won't be as comfortable as the last. I should have known Ben wouldn't go quietly. He wasn't the type to accept defeat, even when it came gift-wrapped in corporate language like mutual separation and restructuring. After his resignation, he went dark for a few days. No posts, no comments, no smug emails. Then the rumors started. First, a recruiter mentioned Ben had been trying to pitch his own consulting firm, claiming he'd been sabotaged by a bitter legacy hire who hijacked the company's internal systems. That legacy hire? Me. Then came the leak. An anonymous post appeared on a niche tech forum, one known for inside gossip in the marketing world. The post accused me of manipulating data, of installing surveillance software before my resignation, and of coercing employees into backing my leadership return. It was transparent. Petty. A weak attempt at character assassination, but it caught attention. Within a day, I had board members asking for clarification, clients emailing to confirm their data is secure. One investor forwarded the post to me with a subject line that simply read, "Should we be worried?" I didn't panic. I prepared, because I knew Ben's ego better than he did. I'd been documenting everything since the day I was forced to sign my resignation. Emails, logs, code timestamps, meeting recordings, including one where Ben bragged about cutting corners because no one at this company knows how to check a real data migration. And unlike Ben, I didn't just play chess, I'd built the board. I assembled everything in a folder titled Full Disclosure, Internal Timeline and Verifications. Sent it to the board, CC'd legal, BCC'd my former team leads. No fluff, no commentary, just truth. By the next morning, the tech forum post had been taken down. The site admin sent me an apology directly. Said they'd traced the post's metadata, submitted through a VPN tied to an IP address previously flagged from inside Ben's former office. The fallout was quiet, but absolute. Ben's consulting firm never launched. His LinkedIn activity vanished. And last I heard, he was trying to freelance for startups too small to know his name. But me? I was just getting started. Because when you build with integrity and document with precision, no one can rewrite your story for you. Ben had tried to burn my name to the ground. He didn't realize I'd already fireproofed it. I sat at my old desk, though nothing about it felt old anymore. The view of the skyline hadn't changed, but I had. The woman who was told to resign because of her age now had full control over her career, her voice, and her worth. The company had learned its lesson. The hard way. The metrics bounced back within 2 quarters. Clients returned. Systems stabilized. But more importantly, something deeper shifted. People started speaking up. Interns weren't afraid to ask questions. Veterans weren't afraid to say no. The workplace slowly evolved from a pressure cooker into a place of actual collaboration. And Ben? I don't know where he landed next. Probably somewhere else where people still confuse arrogance for innovation. But I didn't need to know. His story wasn't mine anymore. The lesson here isn't just about revenge or even justice. It's about value, about how companies so often forget that experience isn't a liability. It's the spine, the muscle memory, the blueprint. And when you erase people for not being shiny enough, fast enough, young enough, you don't get innovation. You get collapse. So to every woman like me who's been told she's past her prime, to every team dismissed for being too experienced or too set in their ways, don't swallow that insult. Don't shrink. Document. Build. Gather your people. Because the tables always turn, and when they do, make sure you walk back in not begging for a seat, but building a better table entirely. That's what we did, and it's what you can do too.